Hello, Sunshine Gardeners. Welcome to the Sunshine Gardening Podcast, where we share tips and inspiration to help your Kentucky garden grow brighter every day. I'm your host, Kristen Hildebrand. In this episode 45, we're exploring the basics of home composting. Joining me today is Jessica Hopkins, the Horticulture Extension Agent in Harrison County. Jessica shares her practical and expert advice on what you need to start with in home composting, from selecting the right equipment and tools to understanding the balance between green and brown materials, as well as the steps to keep your compost pile functioning effectively. We'll also discuss fixing common compost problems and explore the numerous benefits composting can offer to your Kentucky garden. So, grab your gardening gloves and let's start growing with home composting.
Welcome to the Sunshine Gardening Podcast. This gardening show will equip and inspire avid gardeners with tips and tricks to help them navigate the gardening world. The show will also highlight specific growing requirements for seasonal plants, so the sun will shine brighter over their Kentucky garden. And now, here's that ray of sunshine, garden enthusiast and horticulture extension agent, Kristen Hildebrand, with the University of Kentucky Cooperative Extension Service.
Welcome back to the Sunshine Gardening Podcast, and joining with us today is Jessica Hopkins. How are you, Jessica?
I'm good. How are you?
I am good. I'm so glad that you could come and chat with us today on the podcast. And one of those things that we're going to talk about today specifically is composting. And I know that this is a good time of year to think about composting and all the good things that it provides for our gardens. And just to kind of kickstart this conversation today, can you explain what composting is for people who might not know specifically and why it's so beneficial for home gardeners here in Kentucky?
Yes. So composting is something that happens naturally. It's the decomposition of plant material or anything that is an organic type material. So home composting is essentially taking all of those objects and putting them in a specific location to help speed up that decomposition process. And then from that, over time, as everything decomposes and gets all the way broken down, we can actually take that compost and apply it to a garden bed or a flower bed or to our lawn and basically build back good organic matter into our soil. So it's really a full circle process.
Yes. And it's really a good, like you said, you're breaking down all these different things that are organic and living out in, whether it be the yard or the kitchen that you can use. And what great amendments. A lot of times I recommend that you start with the building of the soil before you get great gardens.
Yes, for sure.
Mm-hmm. So Jessica, what basic materials can someone use to start composting at home? Because it sounds like this is something that we need to take advantage of.
Right. Yeah. So it can actually be as simple or as complicated as you want it to be. So composting for gardens specifically, and what I have done in the past, is I just have an area of the yard or of the property, and I will take, at the end of the season, I will take plants that have died, they're an annual and they're done for the year, raked up leaves or anything like that. And that's what's going to go in it. A lot of people will make like a little bin. It can be like a 3-sided bin out of pallets, just to kind of keep an area contained. It can literally just be an open pile that you're going to add to. And then there are also containers that you can purchase for this reason, like at a home improvement store, at a garden center, something like that, that are an enclosed barrel type situation that you can add your compost to, and it's actually going to keep it completely enclosed and keeping air out. And that is going to make your composting or your decomposting go much, much quicker. Essentially, it's going to sit over time and it's just going to decompose on its own. But those systems that are enclosed, it happens much quicker than just a pile that you have set aside. Either are perfectly fine. I have used all the options. It just kind of depends on your budget as well as your location and what purpose you're wanting to do. If it doesn't need to happen super fast, then just a small area off to the side of the yard or to the property is a great option.
One quick question there. I know you said it depends on, kind of like your budget and what you want. But as far as like site for it, do you need to have full sunlight for this or no?
You don't have to. So full sunlight is actually going to help with the decomp process because that heat from the sun is going to heat whatever is in the compost pile. Therefore, it's going to break down quicker. So if it's partially shaded, I wouldn't necessarily suggest full shade, but if it's partially shaded, maybe along the side of a ridgeline or of trees, that's fine. It's just going to take it a little bit longer.
Right. That's true. Now, is there any other hand tools that we need to have? I know you mentioned a couple of the bin systems, but
Yes.
Are there any hand tools that can be helpful?
Yes. So the bin system, like I mentioned, usually that is a hand tool isn't necessarily going to be needed other than shoveling what you have compost wise into your compost bin. The bins that are more open, whether it be just a freestanding pile, or if you've got a little makeshift area that you're kind of keeping enclosed, like I said, I've used pallets before where they're on three sides and you have one open side and it just kind of keeps everything contained. If that's the case, then you are going to need a rake or a shovel. So over time, as you add things, you are going to need to turn that pile. And what that does is that just turning it releases all of those microbes that are going to be doing the decomp work. So taking a shovel, taking a rake and just kind of mixing that up or turning it over, just moving it around, then that allows that process to work more efficiently. If you just let it sit there and do it on its own, it will work over time. But it is recommended to take a shovel, take a rake, and mix all of that up on occasion. Every few days is fine, just to allow everything to mix together. Because what's going to happen is what's on the bottom and what's on the inside is going to start decomposing first. So once that starts to decompose, then that's where all of your microbes are that are making everything happen. So we want to make sure that those can get access to everything else that is in the pile. So whenever we move or rotate that pile, then that allows those microbes to spread out, which will then allow all of the process to happen throughout the entire pile, not just in one small little section.
Absolutely. And I think we have a good idea now on basic materials. I know you kind of walked through the bins and what we need on that front end, but could you walk us through this next step of actually setting up the compost bin? I know that we talk a lot as extension agents about what materials are best for the compost piles.
Right. So what are we actually composting, right? What needs to go in there now that we have an area set aside? So basically, we are going to have a combination of what is called the brown stuff and the green stuff. So the brown stuff is your carbon or your carbohydrates, and the green stuff is your nitrogen or your proteins. And we need a mixture of both. A higher ratio needs to go toward the brown stuff than the green stuff because that's going to break down quicker. Not asking you to measure your stuff out, but just in general, that ratio needs to be 25 parts brown and 1 part green. And again, that's to make it as efficient as possible. So what I mean by the brown stuff and the green stuff, the brown stuff is high in carbon. So that's going to be any dried grass, dried leaves, newspaper. If you were digging out your annuals, like it's finally getting cool now and they're done, they're spent, pulling out things from your flower bed or from your garden, that's going to be considered the brown stuff because it is no longer actively growing. Now, if we had things that were actively growing, then that would be considered the green stuff. So the green stuff is high in nitrogen, which is like fresh cut grass as opposed to dried grass, or a fresh plant that was still growing. You're just tired of your garden and you want to pull it out. That would be the green stuff as opposed to at the end of its life cycle, the brown stuff. So your vegetables, your fruits, as far as like just your waste from your kitchen, that's going to be part of that green stuff category.
Right. And I know you said that we kind of need to have that perfect ratio, but
Right.
It seems like brown versus green material, we tend to get a little bit more browns in the fall of the year, whereas
Yes.
greens We typically, with the grass clippings, it's more of a spring. So do you recommend maybe stockpiling some of these things when we need it, once we get started, to give that perfect ratio?
Yeah, that can work. And like you say, if you're starting now in the fall, you are more likely to have the brown stuff. So it is really a good opportunity to start because it's going to be more effective because you're going to have more browns than greens. But you can start at any time of the year. So maybe you are one that likes to rake up your leaves. Personally, I leave the leaves on the ground and mow them into the yard. But a lot of people, they like that clean look of raking up the leaves. So maybe just kind of keeping those in one spot. If you're not going to start your compost pile until the spring or summer and you know that you're going to do it, you just know that you don't have time. So yeah, kind of stockpiling that can definitely work if that's your choice.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So you've mentioned that browns and greens are good, but what things should we avoid in adding in our compost pile? Because, there's seems like we want to do this, but we shouldn't add other things.
Right. And honestly, that might be more important than adding.
Yes.
Because there are some things that you definitely do not want in your compost pile. Mm-hmm. So several of those can be meat, okay? Bones, like if you had chicken wings for supper and then you got the bones, okay? We don't want to add that. And after you think about it, you realize why. Because this is going to be an outdoor bin type of situation, even if it is enclosed. One, those take a really, really long time to break down. And two, if it is not an enclosed type of system, then you're going to draw in some wildlife, we will call it, some animals and some critters that you're probably not going to want to have, whether it be rodents or it could be possums and raccoons and skunks and things like that. So we don't want to include any of those items that are going to bring in those critters because that's just going to cause us a whole other problem. And even if it is an enclosed system, then the smell is going to be terrible, okay, during that decomposition process. So we don't want to include meat, bones, dairy products, oils, because it's going to take them forever to break down. And then, of course, the smell. So we also, when we're thinking about like cleaning out our garden, I mentioned pulling out dead or spent plants, whether that be your vegetable plants or flowers or whatever it may be. Mm-hmm. And those are perfectly fine to put in your compost bin. However, if you have plants that have disease issues, you do not want to put those in your compost bin. What can happen with that is as that plant breaks down, those disease and those fungal spores and things like that can also be in that compost bin with your plant. And then over time, that's not necessarily going to die out. And then whenever you go and you spread that compost on your yard or on your garden or whatever it may be, then you have the potential of spreading those pathogens or those spores that we do not want to keep around.
Right.
So no diseased products need to go into the compost bin.
Exactly. And I'm glad that you mentioned that because that's a common question that we get here at the office with composting. So that we always try to recommend what you just said there about avoiding that. Now, I did have a quick question, Jessica, on things like such as animal manure. What do you recommend for a compost pile or a compost bin system?
Right. Yeah. So when we think about compost, a lot of times we think about compost being from an animal, from their feces, and then over time, then that breaking down and being sold as compost. And that's all well and good. But that does not need to go in our outdoor compost bin. Our outdoor compost bin, from a homeowner perspective, is going to be a much smaller scale, and it is going to be something that we're using on our garden. If we are doing something with animal waste, whether it be livestock, whether it be pet waste or kitty litter, anything like that, our compost pile is generally not going to get hot enough for any of those bad bacteria to be broken down and to be depleted. So that is not something that we are going to want to spread onto our garden or our yard or whatever it may be. So from animal waste, it can become compost, but the temperature that needs to get to break down the bad stuff is generally going to be more than what most of us are handling from a backyard perspective. So that's just something to keep in mind.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Now, I feel pretty good now about what not to put in the compost pile. Can you kind of give us some of your tips for maintaining that right balance of greens and browns?
Yeah.
Is there anything that you kind of recommend? Because especially for a beginner, that may be a little bit hard to accomplish.
Right. So you do need the greens and browns, which we've talked about, but also in order for everything to break down as it should, you are going to need some 3 different components: oxygen, moisture, and the correct temperature. So oxygen is needed for that decomposition to happen because all those microbes and things do need to breathe in order to stay functioning. And also, the more oxygen you have, the less smell that you are going to have because you're getting better airflow throughout the bin itself. And earlier I mentioned turning the pile, whether it be with a rake or with a shovel, and that's going to promote more oxygen to filter throughout the compost bin, which is going to help with the decomposition component, making that a little bit more efficient. Moisture is also needed. So if it is an outdoor pile, an outdoor bin, in theory, we will get enough rain for that to work out. If you had one this summer, then you might have struggled. But if we're not getting rain, we actually will need to water that on occasion, because all of those microbes, not only do they need that oxygen, but they also need moisture in order to stay working, to stay alive. So watering just with a water hose just on occasion if we're in a really dry period. If it's over the winter, then hopefully, we're going to have some snow, we're going to have some rain and things like that. We won't be in a drought like we've been this summer. But if we are in a drought, then you will need to add moisture yourself. Usually nature kind of takes care of that, but just in case it doesn't, then you'll need to water. And then the other is the correct temperature. So the optimum temperature for a compost pile is between 90 and 140 degrees Fahrenheit. That high temperature is going to be needed to kill any weed seeds. So we mentioned bringing in cut grass or different products that we had growing in our garden. If there's any weed seed in there, then we don't really want that at all, but sometimes it can happen and we have no control over that, or we don't realize that we're putting that in there. And we want that high temperature to kill that weed seed. If we have weed seed in there and it's really happy and it doesn't die, then whenever we go and spread that compost, then unfortunately we're going to be spreading weed seed as well, which is a nightmare for a gardener. But also the higher the temperature, the more breakdown you are going to have and the more efficient your breakdown is going to be. So having that oxygen, moisture, and then a high temperature, which again is another reason to put it in a sunny location, that's going to be your components that you need in addition to those browns and greens.
Yes, yes. So as far as what consistency we're looking for in the moisture, I know you mentioned there's, hopefully we get rainfall.
Right.
But do you kind of need to have a consistency that you're looking for? Like maybe not sopping wet, maybe not too less, but maybe there's an ideal type to have.
Right. So moist but not wet is good. And allowing it to dry out is also okay. You just don't want it to become completely bone dry where it's going to be hard to get everything moist again. Now, one thing that I didn't mention with moisture is if you have one of those enclosed bins, then that keeps the water out, but you still might need to be adding some water to that because water is going to be a necessary component for that decomposition process to happen. So the ones that I have used before in the enclosed bins are like a barrel, and you would just unscrew the lid and spray some water in there and mix it all up that way. So you need water, but it doesn't necessarily need to stay sopping wet. Again, if that happens with rainfall, we can't help that. But if you are adding additional water, you just want to kind of moisten it down.
Right. So say if we get a little bit excited about the water, like we have to supplement water, I guess we could always add more brown or...
You could, for sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you could add more to it to kind of help offset that too much water. If we are in a situation where we're going to get tons of water or rain, you could also, ahead of time, you could cover it with a tarp. If needed, you would just want to make sure that you remove that tarp whenever all of that rainfall is done. But Yeah, adding some browns or some greens, but especially the browns would help a lot if you have that availability to do so.
Right, right. And as far as like, I know you already kind of mentioned about turning and what to turn the compost pile with, but how often should we go out there and be turning? Every couple of days or just
Yeah,
once a
every
week?
couple of days to once a week. It kind of depends on your situation. If you had more green than brown, for say, then I would probably turn it a little bit more often just to make sure that you are getting everything that's been eaten and being decomposed kind of move throughout. And anytime that when I have done compost bins, anytime that I go to add something, I also turn. That is kind of a rule of thumb for me. I turn it and then I add, or I add and then I turn depending on the situation. We just want to keep that turn pretty regular. I know sometimes it's easy to just forget about it and walk away. And again, that's okay. It'll still be fine, but it's just going to take longer. So to be efficient, every few days is definitely going to be recommended to turn. And if you're not getting any rain, then also to give it a little drink of water to make sure that process is still happening.
Exactly, exactly. Now, I know that we've talked about the bin system, what materials are good to add. We need to have the right temperature as well as giving it moisture and then also turning it as we add moisture and then also add materials. But as far as how long does it take if you're in that ideal situation, how long does it take for a home compost pile to actually make finished compost? And what does that look like, Jessica?
Yeah, I don't have a time frame necessarily because it's all going to be dependent upon what you put in. Mm-hmm. So if it is taking a long time, then maybe you just don't have enough stuff in there to be decomposing, or maybe you have too much green and you need to add more brown. You might not have enough moisture. You might not have enough air. There might not be enough oxygen. So maybe you need to turn it a little bit more frequently. During the cold weather, like over the winter, it's not going to work very quickly. Okay. So inside that compost pile, you will still have some warmth, but in general, you're not getting that hot sun baking it like it happens during the summer. So just continuing on and adding more to it will help it go a little bit quicker. The enclosed bins, like the manufactured things that you can purchase, they are expensive, but they are much, much quicker in order of breaking things down. And one thing that I have found too that you can add, so in the summer, I always have planters on my front porch. I don't have a lot of landscaping, but I like to have planters with different annual flowers and things. And I don't like to reuse my potting mix from year to year. I don't like to keep it that way. It's easier for me to get rid of the potting mix and clean up my containers and stack them all up and store them that way. So one thing that you can add to your compost pile this time of year, if you do planters like that, throw that potting mix that you used into your compost pile. And that will get you a lot of help moving forward with your compost bin, the decomp process, because you are already adding really good organic matter straight into the compost bin. So adding that to what you already have is fantastic. So, and then mixing that all together, that's a really good way to boost those brown numbers and make it work a little bit quicker.
You've done really good on everything so far. I wanted to go back just a second on the temperature. Do you recommend like a temperature, like thermometer or a gauge, just to kind of see? I know you said that there's that optimal temperature range. And for some people, that might be, like you said, it's probably going to be rocking and rolling at that temperature in the summer months. But in the winter, you want to check that.
Yeah. So you could totally use a temperature gauge to determine what that is. And then, like I said at the beginning of the talk, this can get as simple or as sophisticated as you want it to be, whether it be, just a little pile that you have going, or a bin that you have set up, or a manufactured bin that you've purchased. It can be at any level that you want it to be. And I would say that some people, I have never used the temperature gauge myself. I have definitely been more on the lax side of things, and it just being simple and just as it works. And for me, that was fine. And I just made sure that I did all of the components with the water and, the moisture and the airflow and that sort of thing, and turning it like I should. I have never used the temperature gauge for this process, but you totally could. especially if you are wanting to be more efficient about it. That would be totally fine. And like say that range, the optimum of 90 to 140 degrees, that is a pretty big range, but that's what research shows that it should be. And the killing the weed seed is going to be on that top 140. That's going to need to be higher. But the hotter your temperature is, then the faster it's all going to work and break down.
Mm-hmm. Right, right. Now, as far as troubleshooting our compost piles, I know you kind of mentioned a few things about turning it, but are there some other things that people have kind of had some challenges with that you could easily fix if you just know the certain tricks of the trade?
Yes, definitely. So there are some questions, like whenever I've offered this as a class and people have tried it or phone calls or whatever it may be, there are some things that seem to be kind of common questions that come about. So one of those problems that people will say is there's like a rotten egg smell. And they're like, I didn't put any eggs in the compost, but it has this smell. So generally the cause of that is there's not enough air or there's too much moisture. So the way that you kind of fix that is you need to turn it more. So it's getting more air and you're doing that maybe more frequently than you have been in the past. So turning that pile more. And it could be, maybe we got a lot of rain. It wasn't necessarily that you were hosing it too much, but maybe we just got too much rain and that will dry out. But if you were watering it manually yourself, then maybe you were watering too much. So that one's a common one. And another common one is an ammonia smell. Mm-hmm. And usually that means too much nitrogen, so too much of the greens. So we need to add more brown to balance out that ratio. And then a couple others, one problem people will say is, maybe it's decomposing too slowly. And I mentioned that earlier. There's lots of causes for that to be the case. It could be weather dependent. It could be temperature. Maybe it's not getting hot enough. Maybe you don't have enough brown in there and you have too much green, or not enough air. You're not turning it enough or not turning it frequently enough to get all of that airflow and those microbes kind of moving along. So that could be something as well. And then another one that can happen is if it is drawing like pests, rodents, critters, like we've talked about earlier. You hopefully, maybe it was an accident, not on purpose. You could have put some food waste in there that you should not have, that is going to be drawing those critters, like we talked about, the meats and bones and things like that. So, but things can happen, on accident. But one thing you can do is if you have food waste, like from your kitchen scraps that you have put in there that was not on that do not put in there list, one thing you can do is actually bury that food waste. So take some of your compost that's already there and turn it on top of more of your, quote, fresh items. And that way that kind of covers it. The smell is not as open to the air for those critters to come to. And it also needs to decompose a little bit quicker. So moving it kind of to the middle will help with that. And then just a reminder, don't add those meats and your dairy products, any of your baked goods, any of the oils or things like that, that's just going to take a really long time to decompose. Those items are all going to draw critters. And even though like the oil is not necessarily a bad thing, it's just going to take so long to decompose that you're more likely to get those critters to come to that kind of stuff. So not including those things in the compost pile, just putting those just directly into the trash is going to be a better situation.
Absolutely. And I feel like we've had a really good discussion today on like what things to add, what options that you have as far as bin systems, and then things to try to avoid, as well as the troubleshooting that we just talked about. I know that we're kind of nearing the end of our talk today, but Jessica, are there any good resources or tools that you recommend for someone maybe that's just beginning their composting journey that would be helpful?
Yeah. So we are with University of Kentucky Extension Service. So on the University of Kentucky Extension webpage, there you can do a simple Google search for extension and composting. There are lots of resources available that way. Anytime you are doing any type of looking up information, I highly recommend to use an extension service, whether it be through UK or from another state, because that is going to be researched information. and it's legit information that they are sharing with you as opposed to just a random website. So I would encourage, if you ever do any type of Google search, to include University of Kentucky or extension in the title, and then that's going to pull up your correct or more accurate publications and information for you. Also, checking out your extension office in your county, whatever county you live in, whether it be your agriculture agent or your horticulture agent. Someone in the county will have some information that they can give you with pictures of different types of systems, as well as kind of what we have said, except in writing. We'll be happy to help you. And it's really good to talk with your local extension agent. In Kentucky, we have one in every county, because you can ask specific questions directly toward your situation that you have, and we can try to address those questions and give you answers that's going to be most helpful for you specifically, as opposed to, I mentioned, the internet is a great thing, but sometimes it gives you way too much information. So definitely reach out to us individually, stop by our offices or call us or email us, and we can direct you with good, correct information specific to your situation.
That's right. Jessica, you covered everything so well today. I appreciate you being on the podcast today, and hopefully we've inspired just through our discussion on how to compost, and people are going to be having some great rewards soon, so that way they can use in their garden. So appreciate you joining us today. I can't wait to talk to you again next time.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
That wraps up today's episode of the Sunshine Gardening Podcast. A big thank you to Jessica Hopkins from Harrison County for joining us and sharing such helpful information on how to start home composting. If you're looking for resources related to this episode, remember to check out our show notes for episode 45 over on the blog at warrencountyagriculture.com. Also, if you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to leave a review on your favorite podcast platform and share it with your friends and family. Thanks for joining me today as we explored the wonderful world of home composting. Until next time, happy gardening.
Thanks for listening to the Sunshine Gardening Podcast with Kristen Hildebrand. If you enjoyed today's content, make sure to hit the subscribe button wherever you get your podcasts to catch future segments of the Sunshine Gardening Podcast. Gardeners, keep on digging and learning more about gardening so the sun shines brighter over your Kentucky garden. The Sunshine Gardening Podcasts with Kristen Hildebrand is a production of the University of Kentucky Cooperative Extension Service.